13 new horror games of 2023. You guys like scary games?
Thankfully, in 2023, we have no shortage of horror games. So today we're talking about some of the best
I will say I'm not a
new
huge
and
fan of
upcoming horror games of 2023. We got 13 of them. It was hard to cram it down, narrow it down into this list. So if you have your own picks, let us know in the comments. But let's get started off talking about these with number 13. Of course, we have to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game. I mean, it's a classic horror franchise. Despite the gameplay maybe not being totally horror, you know, it's an asymmetrical multiplayer style game that we've seen adapted to horror franchises in the past, but this one just seems like it's been given an extra level of care. The recreation of the family's house, the fact that you play as both survivors and the family members, either trying to kill the teens or as the teens escape from both the depths of the house, the upper house, and of course the surrounding fields. There just seems to be a level of detail and appreciation for the original film that we haven't really seen in a while. You know, no shade to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies of recent times. I mean, yeah, okay, maybe some shade to them. Still, it seems like they could have a good
show like
thing
the actual
going
gameplay
here,
of the thing, or is it just
if they
the
can
scenery?
make the rest of the gameplay as compelling as playing as Leatherface, because that's the biggest hurdle, right? Everybody wants to play as Leatherface, but sometimes in a multiplayer game you can't. So if they can make that compelling and
monkey
interesting,
suits, beer hat,
that's going to be a win.
Actually
the design of the house, all of that stuff, lovingly recreated, seems like a good way to get me in. But we have had our eyes on this one for a while now. We're hoping for the best, and it releases this summer.
Bro,
next over at number 12, we have the Dead Space remake.
Kona,
earlier
W hat.
It started off with a bang with the Dead Space
beer
remake.
cowboy.
It did not reinvent the wheel. It did not completely change up the original Dead Space. What it did was give it pretty graphics, more atmosphere, more terror, and smart, clever little change-ups here and there, either in the gameplay, playability,
just smashing
and
his head
little tiny
into a wall.
additions to the story that just heightened the experience. It makes it essentially the definitive way to play the original Dead Space. It's not a different way. It's just mostly, in our opinion, a better way. It's scary, it's dark, it's gory, and people love it for a reason. There's a reason this thing came out of nowhere, blew people away, and really created a whole franchise, whether you like that or not. The original game is downright incredible. It's action, sci-fi, survival horror at its best from the mid-2000s, and this is a really good representation of it. If you like games like Resident Evil, but you're also into horror movies or weird sci-fi horror movie things like Event Horizon, Dead Space is up your alley. If you haven't considered it by now, you should. Now, next over at number 11, we have the Resident Evil 4 remake. Yeah, we're including the remakes back to back. We're just grouping them together. I remember playing the demo for this. They're easy picks. The Resident Evil 4 remake is an absolute blast. It's another one that's just a great representation of the original game. Tonally, this one is a little bit different, but it still maintains that good mix of creepy terror and absolute outright zaniness that the original game really kicked off and frankly kind of changed the Resident Evil franchise for better or worse. Still, playing it again in 2023 is awesome. Leon is more badass than ever. He's more playable and more capable. See, I think like them doing remakes like this more to do in the game world, and it's downright gorgeous. Graphically, sure, but really from an art design and direction standpoint, all this stuff. It's a weird, strange descent into madness horror trip that is also part like over-the-top Japanese action movie. Like, it's something worth checking out if you never have before. I feel like at this point we're preaching to the choir. I don't know how much more we can say about it, but yeah. I don't know if I'm gonna want every single game. Number 10, we got something special that you may not have heard of. It's called Demonologist. It's on PC, and if you're a fan of specifically Phasmophobia, this is more of like a spooky, realistic, slow-paced, good graphics version of that. Or if you like other games with players, I don't know, even Among Us or prop hunt games, ghost hunt style games, Demonologist is worth checking out. People have absolutely been loving it, and essentially it's up to you. Bro, I got so bored with Phasmophobia. Like, you literally log in, start the mission, and then I'm just like sitting there like, bro, no, man, I'm just trying to get the ghosts on you just so you can run around and like do something. I did not enjoy that game. You and maybe up to 3 other players to cooperatively go around areas and identify what kind of spirit or ghost is in this place, and then you need to exorcise it. You need to perform an exorcism, and you're doing it with old school small tools, very lo-fi tech, crosses, research, you know, doing ghost exorcising the old-fashioned way. You don't need fancy Ghostbusters hardware here. It's all about like the darkness, the pace of it all, and the scares. There's always going to be jump scares. There is a safe house you can take advantage of, but like you still just kind of always feel unsettled. It has voice interaction. It has stuff
Ghosts
you'd
or
expect
aliens,
from this
chat?
style of game.
Which
but
one is
it's running an
more
Unreal Engine
believable?
5, and that just really seems to heighten the experience. You're customizing your characters. There's a good handful of maps, and like I said, people have been really digging it since it released earlier this year. Next, over at number 9, we have the Silent Hill 2 Remake. This was announced earlier this year, and it's in the works after many rumors by Bloober Team, the people behind The Medium or Layers of Fear. The Silent Hill 2 Remake, as of right now, we haven't seen too much of other than a reveal trailer. We know that they're keeping the story intact from what they say, and kind of overhauling the combat a little bit, because the combat was rough, but, you know, we're still very curious to see how this shakes out, because Silent Hill 2 was such a special, unique game, and we worry whether or not that feel can be replicated in 2023, especially by a different development studio. Still, as much as Konami has had its missteps and it should be criticized, we would still love to see the return of Silent Hill. There are other games in the works in the Silent Hill franchise. Others announced that we can't fit on this list because they're probably not coming this year, but we might see Silent Hill 2 Remake.
These like movies?
Rumors have been suggesting the fall, and that's the perfect time of year to play this type of game, so we hope to see it. Next, over at number 8, we have Killer Clowns from Outer Space, the game. Yeah, we're continuing this trend of bringing weird old horror games into the forefront
the way
of
around.
video
Oh, they
games
made a
in
movie
multiplayer
based
fashion.
off of the
and
game?
Killer Clowns makes sense. You know, why not?
Oh,
First
shit,
of all,
okay.
the fact that this franchise is getting a game is wild, so we're just gonna roll with it. It's not out yet at the time of making this video, but we're looking forward to it as weird fans.
Imagine everybody that's like deathly scared of clowns, and then now they're gonna be showing ads for a scary clown movie, bro. All those people are gonna be getting like PTSD for sure.
The original, and you know what, again, even if this game turns out to be not so great, the fact that Killer Clowns is getting some representation in 2023 is kind of a win. You might think we're crazy, but hey, go watch the movie, see for yourself. Next, over at number 7, continuing the multiplayer trend, bear with me, we stumbled across this cool game apparently releasing this year called Carnival Hunt. This is a horror first-person asymmetrical multiplayer game with kind of like a social angle to it. Essentially, you're in this haunted, creepy carnival world, and one person is playing as this thing called the Carnival Monster, and the other players are trying to survive as these bunnies. The bunnies, of course, look disgusting and gross, like weird hybrids of Five Nights at Freddy's and I don't know, Silent Hill. But essentially, the bunnies are wind-up dolls, so they have to find keys and wind each other up to keep themselves going, and also try to avoid the spooky, creepy carnival monster at the same time, because he can hear you cranking your friends. Sorry. There are a few different carnival monsters.
Okay, honestly, that's like a pretty good like premise thing, because then you can't just have people sitting behind a box. They have to constantly be going out and getting like, you know, cranked up by their teammates. So then they have to be moving. So that's pretty good. So it's not like just resident sleeper, you know, hiding forever.
Monsters that a player can play as that look creepy and cool, and we really hope something comes out of this one, because sometimes a good simple game like this with a straightforward premise works. I mean, remember the Slender Man games? They weren't perfect, but they had some good simple scares. So Carnival Hunt maybe being like a multiplayer spin-off of that is something we'd like to see. And like we said, the developer, Beer Night Studio, and publisher Crytivo have it slated for 2023. Next, over at number 6, we have Alone in the Dark. This is like a reimagining of the original classic game from the early 90s, with clearly much better graphics, more puzzle solving, more combat, and David Harbour as Edward Carnby. To be honest, this one's still up in the air. We don't know how this one could fare, how it could play, but from what we've seen from the trailers and the gameplay and stuff, it seems like a good, straightforward, third-person survival horror type game. The original game was filled with good scares, interesting puzzles, and just a great haunted mansion atmosphere, so we're hoping that Alone in the Dark can really continue that. This brand has needed a revival for a while. Alone in the Dark could absolutely crush in the modern age as another big franchise in the horror world. So we're hoping that they nail it. As of right now, pending any delays, Alone in the Dark is slated for October 25th, 2023.
Oh. A horror
Next
game
over at
on
number 5,
October
we
release.
have
Pretty
Daymare
smart.
1994 Sandcastle. This is the follow-up to Daymare 1998, a really underrated game that was kind of like a spiritual successor to classic like Resident Evil 2 style horror. 1994 Sandcastle actually is going to serve as a prequel to that pretty cool game, and it seems like it's going a little crazier, a little bit more action, a little bit more tech, a little bit more gadgets to use, like scanning your environment, using this kind of freezing grip device, and fighting off against crazier, more challenging, deadly, scary enemies. You're playing as a new protagonist this time around, and you're going into like a top secret military research facility that of course is filled with monsters and zombies. I mean, what will we be doing here?
Okay.
There's big action moments, there's survival horror elements, there's environmental puzzles that you'd expect, there's dealing with enemies essentially coming back to life and maybe being more powerful, and a bunch of challenge with multiple difficulty modes. We're hoping they can knock this one out of the park. As of right now, it's releasing August 29th, 2023. Next, over at number 4, we have Stalker 2: Heart of Chernobyl. While this isn't an outright horror game, it's just got some eerie elements to it. If it's anything like the original PC classic Stalker games that kind of birthed a subgenre, there's an unsettling nature to it. It is, of course, a kind of survival game. You're out in a post-apocalyptic nuclear wasteland, and you're fending off against all different types of people, scientific anomalies, abominations, and there's just an air of mystery to it all that if this new game can keep that feel going from the original, you know, we think it earns a worthy spot on this list. It's just a game worth mentioning regardless. It seems like this time around the visuals are really going to heighten the scares because, I mean, look at this game. You see this on screen.
Does look
here.
Very nice.
It's been through many delays, a tough development process, but we're really hoping we get to see Stalker 2: Heart of Chernobyl finally this year. Next, over at number 3, we have the Outlast Trials, a game that has not been talked about enough, to be honest. We haven't talked about it enough on this channel, but it seems like it's taking the horror world by storm. It's Amnesia gone multiplayer. Essentially, you and your friends are kind of working through some saw traps, like some jigsaw type traps, to be reductive, but there's a bit more to it than that. Of course, it's all based around Cold War experiments, and you're going to be jumping in alone to these challenges or with friends cooperatively and customizing your own characters and making your way through stuff that still feels typically Outlast. Real creepy, gross freaks, gore.
I've seen a couple people
stuff,
playing this.
Everything the doctor.
Was this one good?
As of
I
right
think
now,
you guys
it's still
actually played
technically
it
in early access, but it does feel pretty good. And if you haven't checked it out yet, maybe grab a friend or two and try it. Next, over at number 2, Amnesia The Bunker. The Amnesia developers have really done it again, with really changing things up, but also going back to basics. This is a simple, straightforward game where you're trapped in a war bunker deep below the surface, and you're stuck with nothing but more than a pistol and a lo-fi flashlight that you have to manually wind up. This is an old school game in an old school time period, but it is absolutely genuinely unsettling. We don't want to spoil it or anything like that, but like the original
Maybe I'll have to check out after the Remnant grind is done.
Just kind of go in blind and just
Remnant is
completely
taken over.
this one with a sense of mystery. That's how these games really thrive.
The variety life,
in my opinion, have always crushed it, but The Bunker feels a bit different.
Fun.
It's worth checking it out if you haven't already. For some reason, this one is kind of flown under some people's radar, but in my opinion, the Amnesia experience is still going strong, specifically with Amnesia The Bunker. I'm back in now. Now down to number 1, we have Alan Wake 2. This is releasing this fall, and we're really excited about it, specifically because not only is it a follow-up to the incredible story and presentation and atmosphere and everything from the original Alan Wake, but this time around the developers Remedy have specified that this game is going full survival horror. And from what we've seen of the game so far, it seems like that. It's very much resource management, scarce ammo, small combat moments, and almost like a Resident Evil Remake style over-the-shoulder combat and inventory system that you'd expect, but with lots of scares. Our experience with this game, what we've been able to see behind the scenes, has been pretty spooky and unsettling. It still distinctly feels Alan Wake, because you're still hitting enemies with a flashlight before blasting them with a gun, but the environments, the graphics, the sound design, the atmosphere just really lean in on the horror elements. All of the presentation is downright spooky, and we're excited to experience the full thing. We really hope they nail it with this one. Remedy's had a good track record. We really like their games for a while now, full transparency, but we're just hoping that Alan Wake 2 can actually capitalize on the cooler aspects of the original game, because the original game had some rough gameplay stuff. So hopefully Alan Wake 2 really crushes that. It's got a bigger story, 2 protagonists to play as, and a lot of mystery to be solved, because as much as they're going all in on survival horror, they also have a lot of detective elements. We're excited to see how that all comes together when it releases, like I said, this fall, October 17th, 2023.
Oh, it's coming up.
Those are 13 horror games of 2023, but of course we got some bonuses we got to mention. Blight,
medieval
Survival. This is actually
game?
like a multiplayer game, but with some incredible Unreal Engine 5 graphics, where you're a knight fighting off plague zombies. We don't know if this one is going to release this year, but it might. Also, it's worth noting, Ghostwire Tokyo released for Xbox Series X and S for 2023. It was last year on PlayStation, but now it's on Xbox. If you're on that platform, check it out. Also, Outbreak Island, if you're looking for a little bit of a kind of fort building, zombie defense, survival style game. And My Friendly Neighborhood. This is a game where essentially the Muppets of a television show come alive and they're coming after you. That's a good concept. Those are 13 or so horror games.
Oh, Sesame Street gone wild, dude. Watch out.
There are so many more games releasing worth mentioning that we couldn't include today. So let us know if you got your own personal list.
Nice. Well, that's the top 13 new horror games 2023. Nice job, Gameranx.